Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Unslaved podcast. Very happy to be here with you once again. My name is David Whitehead, and we're here, of course, also with Michael Tsarion. And we're going to be talking about astrology today. Unfortunately, our guest, we were not able to get a good connection with him, so we're going to have him back. We're going to have Richard back at a future date. But Michael and I are going to go into this subject with you here. So I'm going to open up this show with a quote from Carl Jung, where he's talking about this. And he says that, as we all know, science began with the stars, and mankind discovered in them the dominance of the unconscious, the gods, as well as the curious psychological qualities of the Zodiac, a complete projected theory of human character. So welcome, Michael. How's it going, man? What do you think about that quote?
Yeah, well, that just about says it all, because he understood that the numbers 12, the numbers 7, 3, 4, which are implicit in 12 in the Zodiac, these are archetypes. So, Jung was really into that, and he studied it for a long time, and he understood basically the thesis that's preoccupied my whole take on this, which is that it's not about rocks in space floating around affecting your destiny. That hasn't been proven a lot of great attempts have been made to prove it. I certainly give them, 4 stars there, but the real premise that something external to you is affecting your fate and destiny, has always been unproven. It's always been troublesome. It's always been a sticking point. And it actually is one of the reasons why other well-meaning intellectuals just can't get into astrology. They feel stupid, and I completely understand them, because the science isn't really there. And I don't think the science ever will be there. That doesn't shut the door on scientific explanations. But hey, wouldn't it be just a lot easier and more convincing to skeptics to just say, look, this is about your consciousness? The archetype of the 12 got there because we projected it by our consciousness. Just in the same way that the whole of reality is there because we interact with it through consciousness. So why astrologers have insisted, accepting it in this sort of exoteric way, which is really the only way to explain it, I really don't know, because the esoteric approach, that the mind is what this is all about. You have 12 divisions of consciousness. You have 12 faces of your own being. That to me is much more sound, and the umbrella term is archetype. And that's been accepted
nerves, by the way. You even have 12 cranial nerves, by the way. It's interesting.
Right. You see? So when you turn it within to be archetypes, then there's actually a lot of backup, which is why I just can't understand why they just haven't, but I don't know. They put archetypal in the title. They put occult astrology, archetypal astrology, psychological astrology. And then you open the book and there's not a single backup of that. In my work, when I say it's psychological or it's archetypal, the whole premise is that I dismiss what's happening up there and, with those planets. The planets are just placeholders, metaphors for states of consciousness, phases of being, introvert, extrovert, and all the rest of it. And, we should definitely look into that. But then if you break the 12 down, you get the 3 and the 4. And the 3 and the 4 is found in Kabbalah. It's found in tarot. It's found in astrology. The 3, 4, so that these sort of ratios and harmonics that are discovered in all aspects of life, including the human psyche and the development of what we call consciousness. It had a particular evolution, if we have to use that troublesome word. It manifested in a certain particular orderly way, and we can easily have metaphors for that, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not perfect, but neither is any form of expression or language. You're always languaging something, and then you're dealing with the problems of language. But in general, consciousness evolved in a way that can be understood as from a 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, you see. And the Zodiac is a really good way of expressing that. The Kabbalah is as well. It uses 10 or even 11 centers. The Enneagram or whatever, that's 9, you see. And the Tarot has 36. The ancient Egyptian Zodiac, some schools, there was lots of schools, so they all had different systems. But there was a system on the Nile, that had 36 signs of the Zodiac. In fact, if you really go back, there's even modes of astrology that literally, have they don't even have houses so much as sidereal astrology, literally watch the movement of individual stars. So the chart that would have been cast for you at your birth would have actually been so detailed as to be unfathomably complex, because they would have noticed your ruling star, your ruling planet, more like, every single conjunction it had with a famous star. So there's certain books that people go to when they're looking up, say, a famous personality like Hitler or Churchill or Jesus or something like that. And it'll be a sidereal type of chart, right? That literally, or even Mick Jagger or somebody like that, right? It will actually be based on where the sun was, individual stars. Can you imagine how many stars there are? But of course, there's some really important ones to sidereal astrologers, and their entire zodiac is based on, John Dee. His chart was like that. They didn't look at houses necessarily. They looked at the individual important stars like Sirius, and Regulus and Aldebaran and Fomalhaut and Antares, right? And if you happen to be born when the sun was in conjunction to one of those stars, then that was what kicked off their chart for you. Today we barely use that. That form of sidereal astrology has been thrown out, and all sorts of, they've homogenized it into these famous 12 signs of the zodiac. But so even though there's problems with that, though, one must always understand that archetypally the number 12 is really sacrosanct. That's why you have 12 stations of the cross in the journey of Jesus, the 12 disciples and all the rest of it, the 12 brothers of Jacob, Joseph, and it just goes on and on and on with the 12. But there's a reason. It's because it's actually a sort of a expression of consciousness, and then how you divide it is vital, and when you get into astrology specifically, then you have the two loci of the sun sign and the rising sign. And then they do break it down into these 12 generic houses. So people are quite right to say, what's that all about? No system is perfect. I have my own miscellaneous system, that I talk about in the mystery school, or say in Cards on Houses book and all the rest of it. So, and then the Vedic, we should always mention that. The Vedic guys over in India, they got another whole system that is quite different than the tropical. The Western system's called tropical. The Eastern system's called Vedic. I don't use it because I think it's not that accurate. It doesn't work for me anyway. But then there's Chinese astrology. I mean, and tomorrow they'll dig up another version, you see. But this is a very complex area. But Jung is quite right there when he calls it, archetypal. That don't ever think for 1 minute that this is something to do with externals out there. It's probably, the proof just hasn't completely nailed that. Now I like I said, I don't completely close the door on that, because there is a possibility that the light from different stars, just like the light from the moon, right, has affected our pituitary and hypothalamus and all of that. There's a tie-in there, but it's a tie-in nobody's ever bothered looking into. You'd wonder why. They know that the light of the moon is affecting certain plants. Even plants that are kept in the dark, they still respond to the moon. Well, yeah, because although it's not magic rays or anything like that. It's just that when we were young as a race, right, when we were phylogenetically young, looking to the sun, the moon, and the stars, the fascination, or just the looking at it simply, there is a different spectrum of light that comes from different stars. This has sort of been forgotten, right? But I think the subtle organs that we have in our body, these glands like the pituitary and the pineal gland and the hypothalamus, and even the thyroid. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on that hasn't even really been scratched the surface yet. Now, if somebody was to come along and tell me that, and we went into this a bit in the female Illuminati, because there's evidence that priests used to sit in temples for exactly that purpose. The temples were even built, and certain windows and apertures were made to receive the particular light of particular stars. And then in the female Illuminati, we went into how the women, right, they noticed that their gestative cycle was connected to the moon, and that's almost axiomatic. That's sort of generically understood right now. And people are going, well, how does that happen? Is it magnetism? We can understand that with the tides. The moon affects the tides, and even some plants, and even some very, very small life forms in the sea. These single cell, species do respond to moonlight. This has all been checked out and verified. But how can that same magnetism, or the in and out of the tides, affect women, affect consciousness, you see? So my thinking is to do with the light of these particular planets and stars that have somehow, we know it, it's internal because it's phylogenetically installed, just like something in the DNA would be. And you still have to then explain how that would then have anything to do with your character and your fate, you see? So it's wide open, and it's wide open, and I always keep a very open mind. That's how I've been able to develop my systems that sort of take the best of all the other systems, you see, and try to compress them. But I don't stringently hold, to one fixed paradigm, of this sort of Western form of astrology. One has to be so much more creative to get into it. And my shortcut is just to say, I totally dismiss any story about external magic rays or planets as they actually are physically affecting our destiny. There's some connection between mind and matter, between physical world and psychic world, but it still hasn't been nailed. And I prefer to have things, what I consider the right way around, where it's the psyche first and the material later. And to me, that works. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.